is extremely busy with much of his wrapping up of his PhD, which is completing at IIT Patna, and about to enter into his postdoctoral, stunt at Oakland Oak Ridge National Lab. But still, he gets some time out for me. Does me a favor in coming and making some guest appearances. So today we are going to, the topic, as you know, is to figure out, like we all do research. When we do research, a lot of times we get rejection also when we submit our paper or our publication submission, and a lot of times we get rejection. And many of the times what I believe through my own experience is that if you are doing it in a very well thought out manner, then you can highly minimize the chances of rejection. If you do it in a strategic way, and if you follow certain steps, you can and many of those the reasons of rejection are very silly. At least the silly rejection should not happen. And we are going to talk about all of that. We are going to cover a little bit of to begin with on the review process itself, and we're going to talk a little bit about the common mistakes, that lead to rejection, and then the most important part, when you have written your manuscript, now how to be, or while you're writing your manuscript, how to be your own review, how to criticize your own paper, how to become the reviewer for your own work, and then how to do that as a team as well. With your supervisor, with your lab mates, and so on. There are particular styles in which you can do that. So we will discuss that also. And we will also take questions in between. So keep asking us questions, or if you have comments, or if you have ideas which you want to share, like what ways you do your own review, how you do your own review in terms of the manuscripts that you submit. And if you have found a key to success, then do share with us. We will discuss that also. Just say hi and hello to each other. Where are you from? Which university? Which research? What are your research interests? And if you want to, we are forming this community of researchers at Discord, a Rax community, where we try to help each other out through lots of different types of useful materials, videos, courses, software. And we also come on a very one-on-one discussion and try to help each other out. So seniors join our Rax community and help the juniors. Juniors join the Rax community over there and get help from the seniors, and don't do the same mistakes which the seniors did. So that's the entire point of forming the community over there. And the good thing about that community is that anybody who has any question or anything, and I actually immediately get a ping on my phone, and it's very easy for me to track what's going on, what kind of conversation is going on, and if somebody requires specific help, you can reach out as well. So I have given the link, the Discord link over there, so you can join over there if you think that would be interesting. And if you think that is something that is a good thing to do, then do bring your students and your colleagues, and help us to make this community a lot richer, a lot more meaningful and helpful, right? So let us wait for a while. We are like 4 minutes before time, so we'll just like to see just don't be shy. Say hi and hello to each other. And I would love to know about you a little bit, what your research interests are, where are you from, which country you're from, and so on, right? And if you have questions, keep putting it on the chat on the channel. And I'm constantly looking at the chat, and if we are able to answer those questions, that we'll be very happy to answer them. Else, I will try my best to get the answer for you. So whatever questions you have regarding paper writing, regarding manuscript submission, regarding the review process in general, just let us know. And if you have the answers, by the way, it's not necessarily that we will always have the answer. So if you have the answer to something, then do put it out over there for the community, right?
So we start at 8, maybe?
8, yes, 8.
Yeah.
8 is the time, yeah. So 2 more minutes to go.
Yeah. So by the way, it's also live in your YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, it's going. It's actually live over there, and so what we do is we connect Crowdcast to YouTube.
Okay.
Okay, all right. So I think we are almost time, and a very warm welcome to all of you. And I'm so thankful to have Tirthankar back for tonight. And let's hope that we will be able to answer some of your questions, and we will be able to clarify some of your concerns or doubts. Whatever questions related to publication you can ask over here. We will try to answer them. So Tirthankar is just to, So just to give you a little bit of introduction of Tirthankar. Tirthankar is a PhD scholar at IIT Patna. That's one of the premier universities in India, a tech university. And he's just wrapping up. He's about to complete. And he has already bagged a few publications in some of the top-notch conferences and journals. And I felt that why not have somebody from the student community only, who has, through certain failures also, we all went through some failures, so who has gotten the failure experiences and who has also gotten the success. And why not bring somebody from your group only, and to have a conversation, so that was the entire point. Tirthankar is all set to walk into one of the best NLP labs in the US. That's Oak Ridge National Research Center. And if you have any specific questions for Tirthankar on AI, NLP or something, you can put it there, although this is not the forum, but I'll try to compile the answers and give it back to you on Discord, right? Or Tirthankar can also join Discord and provide the answers over there. Okay, so welcome Tirthankar.
Thank you, Shoriza, for inviting me to yet another, I think, exciting session. And you pointed it right, from the student community, I would love to share my experiences and the parents of the peer review process. And while I'm not an expert, but I really like when you said me about this particular session, I was particularly interested because my area of research is actually on the peer review process, and which I'm
Right.
very passionate about. So yeah, so I have I have faced so many rejections in my PhD cycle, as well as I have gone through so many rejected papers and their reviews, like to itself study my my
Right.
problems. So yeah, it's like it's
Yeah.
exciting. I must say.
So that's an additional bonus for us tonight, folks, because Tirthankar's research, one of Tirthankar's primary research is to study and analyze papers that gets rejected and gets accepted. So
Yeah.
so that's interesting. So Tirthankar, tell me something about first let us discuss a little bit about, for those people who are new, who are very new to research, and just very quickly to discuss it a little bit, the usual process of review in journals and in conference proceedings. First of all, maybe a little bit of clarification, because some people have that thing, like, what makes a paper a journal paper and what makes a paper a conference paper. So if we can touch upon that a little bit first. Yeah.
So in the usual case, like in academia, journal papers are like considered as like a very extensive, thorough presentation of one's research. And whereas conferences are like conference papers are usually seen as like a quick update on a very exciting finding, or maybe sometimes in some domains, like people gather and they discuss their findings, which is quote unquote, which is not very prominent in computer science, because in computer science, especially in artificial intelligence, machine learning, or NLP, the community is moving forward with various conferences, and like most of the cutting edge research are getting published in conferences. So that like I was actually going through one of the articles from Moshe Vardi, who is one of the chairs of ACM, and
Right.
like we were suggesting that the main idea of having conferences is somewhat getting lost nowadays, where there is a cutthroat competition of having papers getting published in top tier venues, and then what we have made out of our peer review system, what was it was intended for. So yeah, so in terms of researching, mostly in computer science, conferences are now becoming the de facto standard for publication, whereas people from other disciplines won't, or maybe not, relate to this
Yeah. Right.
mode of publication.
It's
Yeah.
mostly journals in most
Yeah.
disciplines. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so another point is that journals papers are, of course, more extensive. A lot of times what we do, you can do is that you can publish, if your discipline has conferences as one of their venues, and if that is accepted in the community, then you can publish a paper and then extend over it. It published the paper, the original idea, the proof of the concept, so to say, the first few exciting results, and you can publish that in the conference, and then you can later on extend it with a lot more thorough, experiments, and a lot more thorough analysis of the results, of the findings that you get, and then publish it in a journal. So that can be a very good way, in which you can do both at the same time. So
at the same time, Shubhika, some findings or some research actually do not fit within the page limit that are offered by
right.
conferences. So I have struggled many times to fit like some findings within that those 8 page or maybe 10 page limit, because then many things which are we can't put in the paper, and it's very difficult for the reviewer to actually understand the essence. So yeah, some extensive findings uh, do require
Right.
submission from journals. Yeah.
Right. And coming to that, the peer review process itself. So, Tirthankar, if you can just tell some of our young researchers who would be watching this or who are watching this session, if you can just very briefly tell us a little bit about the peer review process itself. Yeah.
Yes. So like uh, if we can say that the peer review process actually originated in the 16th century,
Mm.
and it is still continuing as one of the like most prominent process for scientific research validation.
Mm-hmm.
And although there has been changes in the peer review process, there has been various peer review models that has been proposed quite
Mm.
recently. The open peer review model, then
Mm-hmm.
then the double blind peer review process, single
Right,
blind.
right.
So many improvisations have come to this peer review process, but still the essence is that um, we want our research to be validated by the community, and the community is the peers, the scientists that those are as a part of the community, and they would or like review our research, and if they feel that the findings are strong enough, then probably that research is validated and we get a publication.
Mm.
So the as like I think most of us are aware that the thing is like we do experiments, we write our papers, and then we choose an appropriate venue, we submit there, and then once the paper is submitted, it usually goes through initial process of screening, mostly by the editors or the area chairs of the conference
Mm.
or the editors of the journal, where they usually see that whether the paper follows the given template or or the criteria for that particular journal or conference, and more specifically that whether the paper is within the scope
Scope.
of that conference, yeah, of that conference or journal. And if it passes the preliminary phase, then the editors usually or the area chairs usually forward it to expert reviewers for meticulous evaluation, and then the review process actually starts. And the review process is like the reviewers, who are usually our peers in the community, they review the paper from critically, and yeah, and try to provide their feedbacks, and which is again routed via the editor and the area chair to the authors. So, but in conference, it is usually a binary decision, like
Mm.
it's accepted or rejected. But in journal, it is like a form of dialogue that you enter, unless and until your paper is some grossly misunderstood, I would say. You usually enter into a dialogue with the editors and the
Yeah,
reviewers, and
right.
then via various iterations, you improvise your paper, and finally, maybe it gets accepted, or maybe you are not lucky, so it gets rejected. Yeah.
Right. So it comes to the second point, Tirthankar, that of the various reasons of paper getting rejected, and one thing that you already pointed out, and many people don't realize that how many papers actually get rejected just because it's not simply aligned with the scope of
Yeah.
the venue, whether it is a conference or a journal,
Right.
right?
Right.
And yeah,
I have a
what's your
statistics here.
yeah.
Yeah, I have a statistics here. Literature says that almost 30% of papers get rejected from the desk as because
Wow.
they are not within the scope of the given venue. So yes, authors make uninformed decisions, and yes, there are not many papers which may be meritorious enough, but simply gets rejected from the desk,
Yeah.
might be after some delay in the peer review process. So the
Right.
both time of the editors and the authors get wasted, but it does get rejected. And during the course of my PhD, when I did an analysis of about close to 10,000 rejected papers, we found for certain journals it was close to 50% that papers are getting rejected from the test just because it is not within scope, and even the papers are not scrutinized by expert reviewers. It directly gets rejected from the desk. So there are many reasons, like it is outside the scope, it is not within the domain of operation of that particular journal. Sometimes uh, certain other like characteristics like template mismatch, and
Right.
then grammatically the paper is very poor, language plays, but yeah, this rejection is a real phenomenon, and many papers do get rejected.
Right. Right. So that's definitely one thing, and one particular way in which you can actually make sure that you don't do that. And I keep telling this is to go and look at the last 3 years publication in that particular venue where you are thinking of submitting, and try to look into the research questions or the problems on which those papers have been published, accepted rather, and then try to understand how close your research question is as compared to all the research questions that have been accepted over the last 3 years, say, or 2 years. Don't go beyond that, because what happens is that the scope of a particular conference or journal also changes, and that's something, although at a very upper level you may feel that it hasn't changed, but at a deeper level, if you look at the that if you look at the how the shift is changing in terms of which questions are more pertinent, which questions are more relevant, and the entire point of relevant is very temporal, right, Tirthankar, that it depends upon at what time or what era you are in, right? And so, so one way of doing it is actually to go there and to check out the the publications website, and to go through all the papers that has been published. Even for a journal, go through the issues, the last 2 years issues, and look into the research questions that are getting favored. Right. So, any other tip or point that you would like to add, to Tankar, to this, like how this can be avoided? The very first problem.
Yeah. So I specifically discussed about this for journals or conferences which are very like have a defined domain of operation. But there are certain journals which are very multidisciplinary or in general. Like if you talk about certain journals from the PLOS library, like PLOS One, or certain journals from the Nature Publishing Group. So they are very much interdisciplinary, and their definition of scope is a bit different from specific journals or conferences. Like
Mm.
maybe for them, the quality of the work also ties with the scope, like what kind of work they want to actually like publish. So the quality and scope for those kinds of journals are very like overlapping. So
Yeah,
I can recall one of my experience, like when I sent one of my papers to like Nature, and it was rejected. So but the comments from the editor was like it doesn't meet to the journal standards that we publish. So um, and they obviously forwarded me to some other journal from the same publishing group. But their idea was like they were looking for standard, and for that it was out of scope from the type of
mm,
results that they publish. So
right.
yeah. So regarding tips, as you said, it's very necessary to go through the past publishing papers, not like I would say recent past, maybe 1 or 2 years, and try to see the domain of operation or the type of problem that the
Mm.
particular audience of that journal is interested. So
Right,
it,
right.
yeah.
Right. Look into the publications. Don't just look into only the track topics, but look into the publications, because a lot of times what happens, especially for conferences, I've seen that the track topics are pretty much the same. They don't really change much over there.
Mhm.
So you wouldn't see that much of a difference, like what was the track topics last 3 years ago versus a year ago. There's not much of a difference. But if you look at the closely at the papers that are getting published, you might start seeing there is quite a good amount of difference, in terms of what what they are trying to focus at. So that's one thing. The other aspect, that is one aspect, which is a research question. There is also something about the gambit of the spectrum of the approach itself, right? So one is the research question, but the other one is the approach, like
Mhm.
how the research question is getting addressed, or or the technique, that at a very broader level. Let's say that if a particular journal or a particular conference proceeding favors more of quantitative analysis, but if you
Yeah.
are doing qualitative analysis, then most likely it would lead to a rejection. So, if you can share, if you have experience sharing that sort of a thing, like, where the approach matters also.
Mhm. Yeah, so I can specifically talk about NLP because
Mm.
me being from an NLP background. So in NLP, there like the entire community is moving forward with conferences. So there are various conferences like ACL, NWCL, EACL, EMLP. So one subtle difference that I found in this community is the type of papers that are going into journals, the type of papers that are being published in conferences. So most of the empirical works,
Mm.
like those are like experiments, fancy deep learning models, and then some surprising results are getting in conferences. All these are like very top tier venues. But whenever like some linguistically driven or motivated work, those kinds of work we can find in like there are only two handful of journals like CACL and CL for NLP. So we can find those kinds of in-depth research which is linguistically motivated in journals. And also there is one another conference for NLP. It's I guess schooling. So
Yeah.
it is also very accept research which are very much linguistically motivated, and they usually mention in their call for papers that uh, the research should have linguistic background. So
Mm.
yeah, so it actually depends on the type of papers that particular call for papers or that particular community is looking forward to.
Yeah,
So
and sometimes it's very explicit, but sometimes it's kind of like implicit, and the implicitness is almost like how trend shift happens,
mhm,
where the same conference or the same journal would have
mhm,
preferred a certain kind of techniques at
yeah,
certain time period, and then you see suddenly it's shifting to certain other kind of techniques or other kind of paradigms. So and people are trying to focus more and more over there in that technique, and this
yeah,
happens a lot in technology, in engineering, and to a lot of extent even in experimental sciences like bioscience, biomedical sciences, and so on, where certain things almost suddenly gets out of favor almost.
mhm, mhm,
And in and the interesting thing is that uh, a lot of students make this mistake that they read a paper from a particular journal, let's say during their literature study, literature review, and then they see, yeah, this is the kind of technique that has been published, and it is such a wonderful journal, high impact journal. So which means this journal is going to favor this sort of technique. But you should better write, Tirthankar, like it might happen that that's a very published, very early, at a very early time, maybe for 5 years
right.
ago or something. and you really have to make sure that whether the community is still open to that kind of idea, that kind of approach, and so on and so forth. So that's something that you really have to make sure that you don't fall out of that particular journal's focus.
Yeah, yeah, right. So like this, I must say this knowledge is something uh, which we gather after having certain
Yeah,
yeah. So after having certain setbacks, you know that okay, so this kind of research, the kind of problem that I'm investigating, or maybe the merit of the kind of problem that I'm
right.
investigating may fit into this place, may not be a suitable fit
Yeah,
uh, to
and
to yeah.
and don't get, a lot of people think that, oh my God, such a terrible world, and why is there something like this, and why shouldn't my idea also be embraced and all. So it's not that all the time it's getting done for the wrong reasons, but a lot of times what happens is a particular community has already decided that we will only focus on this approach because we want to make sure that we get a particular bunch of researchers to keep thinking harder and harder and harder on that approach, right? So that
Yeah.
that approach keeps moving or progressing. But at the
Mhm.
same time, it's also true that don't think that there isn't any other community who is not going to look into your approach.
Yes.
So there are, and so Tirthankar, if you can just, let people know that, don't believe that, if one journal is not accepting or not favoring your approach, then there are no other good journals out there who would not accept your or not favor your approach. That's really not the situation, right?
Yes. Actually, like see, like if you talk about peer review, it is like your work is getting judged by three persons in the
Three to
community,
three to four, yeah.
and it is quite similar to like if you are trying to buy a product in an online platform and you are like scrolling the first three reviews and then deciding that
Yeah.
whether you should buy it, you should buy it or not. So yeah, we know that our system
Hmm.
is not perfect, but still it is the best we have. So that's how we have to see. But at the same time, nowadays there are lots of outlets. It's not that, as you mentioned, that it's not that if a paper is getting rejected in one journal, maybe that particular journal or that particular community is not focusing on the type of research or the type of techniques that
Right.
we are presenting in the paper. So it may find, because nowadays many journals are like having very overlapping nature of scope. So a paper in NLP is equally acceptable to someone from information retrieval. So,
Hmm.
but the way the information retrieval people would like to see your research would be different from the way the top-notch reviewers in NLP would value that. So yeah, so there are various outlets, I would say, but but at the same time, one has to be very sure about one's own research before really sending to someone. That's
Right.
why I was like, if my research is not up to the mark of a maybe A-star conference or maybe a very high impact factor journal, I should be wise enough to know that okay,
Yeah.
I should not waste my time to like for those moonshot venues. Rather, it should be get it, it should be sent to some venues where it would have a proper evaluation, and then it may find a place somewhere. So yeah.
Right, right. And that brings me to this, the next topic, which is that which is the real core of today's discussion, which is that even before you send something, you need to be sure, right? And you need to make sure that your quality is as high as possible, you know. Uh, so a lot of times we hurry into submission, right?
Hmm.
and without, while we are doing the research, even we should not be hurrying. My personal opinion is that you should not hurry into writing even before you are absolutely sure about your research. And that research can be research which has a lot of experiments to do, or has a lot of other kind of qualitative, like surveys, questionnaires, group studies, field study, whatever that is, right? But you have to make sure that it is rigorous. You have to make sure that you are actually addressing something that is important to the community, and your approach is unique, right? Your approach is original, and not just original. Your approach will significantly, makes a significant progress in terms of addressing that particular research question.
Mhm.
Now, over here, this is kind of the theme is about, like, the best way to actually figure out, once you are writing your first draft, let's say, the best way is to actually think in the way how a reviewer is going to think, how a very good and strict reviewer is going to look into your work,
Mhm.
right? So, and Tirthankar, if we can discuss a little bit on that,
Mhm.
how a very strict and very good reviewer looks into your work. So let's wear the hat of the reviewer right now.
Yes.
Because you have reviewed papers, I have reviewed papers, so let's try to bring that aspect and try to see, with no bias whatsoever, you have to very strictly scrutinize your own work, your own initial work, and you have to do it at a very initial stage. You can't do it at a very later stage, right?
Mhm.
Yeah,
So one thing that I can say, um, after finishing the first draft is sometimes work for me. Like I should say many times work for me to take a break from the particular paper, maybe 2 or 3 or maybe 7 days, because like we all are very passionate about our work. So we it's really hard to find after we have finished the first draft to find uh like the loopholes. I must say so.
right. There is
It's better
always
to
a
take a break.
cognitive bias that is
Yes,
working.
that yeah, that my like I have done this work, so I'm very passionate and very positive about that. So that usually don't get out of our head. So I would prefer to take a break, maybe 3 4 days, and then try to read the paper afresh. And that really brings like uh that really opens up some places where there are scopes of improvement. And obviously, like your supervisors or your co-authors who would want to read your draft and give feedback. Their feedback is super important. But at the same time, um, as the saying goes, that you are the best judge of your paper once you have finished it. So this thing sometimes work for me, that when I have read the paper after maybe 4 or 5 days, and it sounded really opened up really some avenues where I could have improved. So
Right.
yeah, and at the same time, like as my supervisors, as well as like you must agree that writing the paper in one shot is usually very stressful. So it's better, like while doing the experiment, it's
Right.
better to like iteratively start writing on the draft and maybe write about the data collection. It may be something in a very layman's language, but it eventually helps while compiling all those things, so that everything is in front of you, and you have to just like tie those strings up.
Right. Right. So I think certain things that reviewers are very critical reviewers, like very good and very strong reviewers, are going to look at are, the very first thing they see would be your introduction, right? Depends on that, the introduction section. And if they're not convinced in the introduction section, it's kind of an aftertaste, and they will take that aftertaste throughout the entire paper. And many times they wouldn't even be bothered to read your rest of the paper to that details also to understand what you are trying to say. So your introduction is, for me, it is the most important section of the paper. I know it's like the opening, and if your opening is not good, then you automatically the interest goes, of the reviewer. So you have to look at it from the reviewer's point of view. Tirthankar, if you can share some of your reviewing experiences when you reviewed other people's work, how do you do it? Like, what's the mindset, and what are the
Okay.
stuff that you would first look into?
Okay, so I don't know that it is the right way, but usually what I do is like I first go through the abstract and then the introduction as well as the conclusion in the first
Hmm.
attempt, and then if it really interests me, then I go forward for the subsequent section. So as you mentioned, like introduction is very crucial
Hmm.
in order to retain the audience interest. Your audience is the reviewer whom you are trying to quote unquote impress. So that's the point where we can draw the interest of the reviewer, and then obviously the next sections are more technical because there you talk about the experiments or the data and the analysis you did, but why the problem is interest, or why the problem should get solved, and why no one has done that before, identifying the research gap, all those stuff comes in introduction. So it's really a very important section. And as I said, like when I have reviewed, like I reviewed certain doctor conferences and journals, and
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm.
So the main idea is to first get that whether this is really an interesting problem to solve or not, and how the particular author has motivated towards that problem.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So, so you see, so I'll tell you that whenever you're writing a paper, you will be giving a lot of, you will be making your arguments, your case. That's a paper is all about making arguments, whether it is a paper in science or technology or computer science or humanities and all. You're trying to establish a claim. You have a claim and you're trying to establish a claim, and you want to establish a claim through a series of arguments, right? And many times you would be providing arguments through facts and figures, right? And when you're trying to do when you try to now behave like your own reviewer, you need to make sure that you don't sort of all the citations are there when you are making a fact, when you're making an argument using a particular, as if like it's a fact, you're using a fact. You have to make sure that the right citations are there. That's the and
Yes,
I've seen that mistake happening a lot, that you make a claim, you make a statement that this is how it is, but then how do you know, where did you get that fact from, right? So 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 that's something that I think is extremely important. And one of the things that I personally I have seen, I think Tirthankar is frozen for a while, so we will let him come in, but let me just continue with this. So one of the things that I have seen is that a lot of people are very hasty when it comes to writing things, and they miss out on very, very crucial citations. And immediately, it comes into the radar, the alert of the reviewer, and the reviewer will be immediately very, very critical about it. So missing important citations, when you're claiming something, when you're using some facts and data or making a statement, you will make, and if the statement is one of the most important statements that is trying to give support to your ultimate claim, then it has to be backed with citations, right? So
yeah, citations actually like evidence. teams.
Right.
So yeah, usually as a reviewer, or maybe for any person, like when I would like read a claim or a statement by the author, it is usually desired that that particular claim should be backed by some evidence, and that evidence in academia are the citations. So
Right.
yeah, citations, using proper citations, uh, using citations which are recent, because many a times it is seen as a negative part. Like if you are citing something, a research which has been done in like maybe 20 years, and you have not cited some recent papers, not
Mhm.
only just for the sake of citation, but that also shows that maybe we are not aware of the current state of the art. So
Right.
uh,
Right.
relevant recent citations are super important in the paper discourse.
Right. And even let's say that you are, almost digging out the dead and making the dead alive. Like you might argue that, hey, I'm actually working on a particular research question which lie dead for a long period of time, and
Yeah,
or
yeah,
very very few people are actually working on it, and I am trying to revive that. Let's say, still you need to at least have a few citations where some eminent people of in your community feels that this question needs to be revived. This research
hmm,
question has to be revived. There is a there's a growing interest in reviving that. If not, let's say that nobody is working on it, but at least there is an interest that people acknowledge the fact that this needs to be revived.
yeah,
Either in
and
your
and, and
yeah
yeah,
yeah
and not always the citations should be could be from the research papers. It might be a news article, or it might be an article in a magazine, or maybe in some blog
right
which we can cite.
right
There are so as you say, that certain research may have got not much community attention at some point of time. Maybe if we can think of the classic example of deep learning, like it was
yes
it was the same old idea that was in 80s, which got like in which went into the AI winter in the 90s and
Mhm.
early 2000s, and then like after the 2012 ImageNet moment, everything changed. So yeah.
right.
So
So that's
yeah.
one point that you have to be very careful. Another thing that I think is a common mistake I see is biases, different types of biases that keep creeps into your experiment or your research.
Mhm.
And you don't sometimes, and most of the times it's inadvertently. It's not that you are doing it in purpose, and you don't realize that there are certain biases that have come in. As an example, one bias can be even in the data set or the sample study that you are doing. So you have to be very careful about what kind of data set you are choosing, and is it comprehensive. So Tirthankar, did you experience that, in your own kind of experience, both while submitting your work, or reviewing other people's work, like bias right in the beginning, where the data set or the sample study that they are trying to do, or the experimental setup itself
Mhm.
has been designed, the experiment has been designed in a way that has included certain kind of biases.
Yeah, yeah. So currently, I can talk about the thing that is going on in the AI community. Like there are very large language models which are trying to which are the basis of many experiments. But those language models are actually trained on a huge data set from the internet, and they like intentionally or unintentionally bias towards certain things. Like for example, if you can remember about the project debater from Microsoft, where they launched a system for debating, and after a point of time the system learned to like spit out racial things about certain communities. So these things are there. That is why I can see in my community NLP, in my community, you really require an ethics statement in your paper to say that, okay, this data has been collected and in a very ethical way, or certain kinds of biases are not there in your system. But it is really hard. I must say it's really hard to do away with the bias in data uh, if you are using an existing data set. So it's really hard to shape up your experiment in that way. But yeah, if you are like developing data for your own experiment, uh, you can be you can be careful about certain things, so that um, so that in a very general scenario, your model still works.
Right,
Uh,
right.
yeah. So I can share you my experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was doing experiments on peer reviews for getting that whether this review was significant, or whether this review had enough um, enough material to be considered during the decision making process.
Mm.
So we purposely chose equal amount of data from rejected paper reviews as well as accepted papers. So we wanted to mitigate that bias in the data, so that
Right.
we don't only work with accepted papers. Yeah. So that
So these are the
this is
kind
the
of
how.
things that one has to be careful about, you
Yes.
know.
Yes. Mhm.
Right, right. There are other kind of
So yeah, if you are writing an experimental
hmm,
paper, be sure about the data that
right, right. Another kind of bias that I have seen is sort of like
execute. Mhm.
where the is the way you are trying to evaluate your method, the kind of measures that you are using to evaluate your method, or the parameters that you are interested in observing. And a lot of times what I've seen is that you are not observing the right kind of parameters for when you are looking into your results, or when you try to analyze your results, or you are not uh, or you're not focusing on the most important ones, but
Mhm.
you're trying to show something, some parameters which are secondary, which are not the primary parameters, right? And I think that is another kind of bias that happens when you're trying to evaluate something, evaluate your own approach, or try to establish your claim. Uh, you know, the most important parameters, which actually matters to the research community or to your reviewer, sometimes get lost.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as it is said that, like, if your goal becomes the metric, then the particular metric ceases to be a good metric. So,
Mm,
for example, let us take an example of summarization. So,
mm.
in textual summarization could be extractive, where you extract segments uh, some from some particular text, and then it could be an abstractive, where the model generates the text. So I faced this during one of my experiments. So when I used a particular metric, for example, you might know that rouge, which is the de facto for
Right.
summarization. But if you apply rouge to an extractive summarization thing, it would be definitely giving you a good result.
Higher score.
But
Yes.
if you try to apply rouge to an abstractive one, yeah. So it won't give you good results. So if you are satisfied with only having a rouge score which is higher for an extractive summary, that might not be a very good
Right. Right.
parameter
So you are using the wrong thing for the wrong. You're not using the right measure for.
other metrics to
Uh,
evaluate. Yeah.
right. And that's another kind of
Yes.
bias.
So it's better. Mhm.
The other kind of bias that
Yeah.
a lot of times that happens is the ablation bias, what I call, which is like when you are doing ablation studies, and there can be certain biases while you may not intentionally be doing it. By the way, I'm not telling that you are actually bringing this all of this or intentionally, but because of inexperience or because of the hurry of submitting something and you're so excited about your results that you do not look at it from the reviewer's scrutiny point of view, and the reviewer is not excited about, that is not attached to that work. So the reviewer is going to look at it at in a very clinical manner, and
Mhm.
he or she will definitely look into all these things. Like you might be doing some ablation studies, and Tirthankar, if you can just tell people what ablation studies are, because some researchers may be very young over here. So, and
Yeah.
what kind of bias can happen over there? Yeah, let's discuss that a little bit quickly.
Yeah. So, for example, suppose you have developed a model, and that model can have several different components before like you have reached the result. So, it is usually expected that you dissect the model and try to show that what each component of the model is contributing towards the kind of result that you are achieving. So, it might so happen that a certain component is is so much informative, I would say, or the information gained for that particular component is so high that it actually overrides the other component's contribution. So if we don't do ablation study, then we are failing in providing the information that how each of the components of that model matters. So I can say from my experience, like while I was doing, I was trying to solve the problem for scope detection,
Mhm.
and we used all channels of information from the paper to see that whether the paper is within scope or not. But when we use the full text of the paper, then none of the other channels actually matters. So really, like the contribution of the bibliography or the images, that really didn't matter at that time. So uh, but the argument for us was that while you detect the scope, not always the full text would be available to the audience, or to the particular journal, or maybe you might not be comfortable to give away your full text before actually submitting it.
Right,
So
right,
but if you judge by the full text, none of the other channels actually matter. So this kind of, like, you dissect your model and try to see that what each component is contributing, and usually reviewers would also want to see the motivation of having the various components, like why you have chosen them, and a right method to do that is to do that ablation study. You just plug
right.
off some components and try to see that how your model performs.
Right, right. And I
Mhm.
know, and over there, be absolutely sure to choose the right kind of ablation variables to observe. Because if you're not choosing the most important ones
Yeah.
and trying to, and this is where the bias can come in, that
Mhm.
you're not really choosing the most important one, which matters really,
Mhm.
and you have chosen the secondary variables that are giving you good results.
Mhm.
And you might start feeling that, hey, I've done a great job, so let me submit it. And
Mhm.
whereas a good reviewer in a very good place is not going to look at it that way. He's going to, he will be a lot more,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
hopefully more
So that is
experienced,
the
and
reason, like,
yeah,
yeah. So that is the reason, like, it's usually better to have a third eye to the draft
right,
before actually sending, because um, then maybe some potential new challenges one could uncover, which might have skipped our eye, because we are obviously very positive about the way we
right,
thought for our experiment. So
right, yeah.
a
So
new
that is very well possible.
might,
Yeah.
yeah.
Right, right. And there's another thing that you have to understand is that the way you are the kind of findings that you are submitting, what format you are submitting, and what is the way, what is the format in which your research community accepts it, right? So, which means if there is a particular standard way in which people report their findings, like whether graphically or in tabular manner or whatever that is. And if you're not following that standard way of report, uh, for things that, for a research question that has been dealt with, that that gets addressed by many people, or many people find, submit their own, findings. That can be problematic. Tirthankar, what do you think? Like, because people are used to seeing a certain kind of thing in a certain way when it comes to results and findings, right? And if you don't present it in that way, then it becomes kind of a little bit difficult for the reviewer, and I guess.
Yeah, so that I would call as the community bias. So,
Yeah,
like the same paper you are submitting to NLP community, or maybe if you are submitting it to, for example, if you are submitting to meta science, so you have to write the paper in the way that the community is used to.
right,
Yeah, this is really difficult, I must say, because it comes with experience, which we are still learning, and it really falls into the shoulders of the experienced co-author in your paper, who should guide you uh, towards how to have that paper tailored towards that particular community, because many problems, like the kind of problems that we work through, are very much relevant to IR, are very much relevant to
right.
meta science. But if we like straight away write it in a NLP manner, so the other community will not be interested, I think. So
Yeah,
in
at the least, it will be difficult for them to
Mhm.
evaluate, to judge the paper.
Yeah, yeah. Especially if your references are mostly from a particular community. If you're submitting that paper to the other community, that particular community won't identify the research.
Right,
So having references from the domain, or particularly the community you are interested to submit your paper, uh, with which the reviewers of the target community will identify with, is a good, I think, option.
right.
Is a good thing that one should exercise.
And whenever there are standard data sets to run your experiments, or whenever there is a standard, we use data sets primarily in computational sciences and mathematical science, but in many other kind of sciences and social science and all, there's sample study. You do your
Yeah.
data set is essentially human beings, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So so if there is a standard process of how to collect your, or how to design your sample, follow that. This is
Hmm.
another thing that you have to understand when you are rereading your paper, that you are following the procedure of setting up an experiment or designing experiment that is standard, that has been established in that particular community where you're submitting it, right, Tirthankar?
Hmm. Hmm.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
let's,
And
yeah.
and also like whenever your subjects are human subjects, you definitely need to have the consent that
Right,
you are going to use their data. So this is super important nowadays, especially
right,
because of
absolutely.
the way, yeah. So various controversies of late in the AI community regarding bias and stuff. So having human subjects as your experiments, uh, you definitely need to have their consent before actually like publishing their data.
Right, right, right. So, so let me see if there are some questions, or not. There is one comment from Vidya. It's so difficult to identify one's own bias, right, from our own research work. So there are. So I have tried to address actually this point in some of my earlier videos. On Research with Me, you can look into
Mhm.
YouTube, and let me see if I can at least uh, provide some links to some of the videos. But having said that, the whatever we discussed today, like what are the points, and especially data sets, then the way the experiment has to be designed, the parameters that you are to be that you are trying to observe, the measures that you are going to use, right, to evaluate your work or to establish a claim, and also whether you're adopting more of qualitative analysis or whether you're adopting more of quantitative analysis. It also depends a lot on that community, right? And what kind of measure you're using is going to depend a lot on the community. And finally, the style of writing, or placing your argument. Your arguments will still remain the same, but how you are going to stylize the arguments, what kind of citations you're going to use, right? So these are the kind of things that take care of them that would be important. Now, coming to the last part of the night's discussion is basically how to do it in a team. So, Tirthankar, do you follow a particular, when you're trying to now, the first thing is that I read my own stuff, and whatever, that's the very first level of correction, right? After that, you would be discussing that with your supervisor, or maybe in many places I've seen that happening in a lab also with your lab mates and all, or in your team or collaborators, other collaborators, co-authors, and so on. Is there any particular style that you followed, which you want to share, the way to work with a team, like to do the review process, being one's own reviewer collectively as a team?
Okay, so from my experience, usually we come up with the first draft of the paper, and then like like for my case, like it was not that we have written so much things collaboratively, but mostly after the first draft is done, then the other co-authors stepped in, and then they provided their comments. Like as I said, we need to have a very neutral third eye to the paper, and yeah. So talking from the paper point of view, your collaborators should definitely agree to all the claims or the statements that you have made to the made in the discourse, and whether the argumentative structure has been followed, whatever claims you have made in the introduction, that has been well mitigated via the experiments, and proved via the results, and finally concluded in the conclusion. So this argumentative discourse has to be followed, and yes, so your collaborator definitely plays a very crucial
Right,
role in order
right,
to
right.
like better your paper. And like nowadays you see that research can't be done in isolation, so it's all about how better you are collaborating with your colleagues.
Right, right.
Mhm.
So, so that is one thing. The other thing is that make sure that first of all, everybody who would be helping you out in the review process, make sure that you don't tell them to review it at the last moment,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
make sure that you respect everybody's time,
Mhm.
and make sure that and one interesting thing that I felt, when I looked into it, that if you give things in parts, then psychologically they don't feel like, oh, there's a lot of the entire paper, I have to review the entire paper. So if you, let's say, start with the introduction, okay, send out the introduction to your supervisor or to you, whoever lab mates you or colleague you want to see, and then get the feedback on the introduction, work on it, and then part by part by part. What do you think, Tirthankar, about that process? Because then what happens, it's not overwhelming
Mhm.
for the other person, and they can focus. Okay, this is how the introduction has been written, and these are the issues, or these are the loopholes on in the introduction. So let me just focus on the introduction, quickly give you the feedback, and so that you can work on it, and you can later on send the other sections one by one by one.
It is, I think, actually, Shodhisa, it is actually interpersonal. So now, like those who are your active collaborators, this thing I think would work very well. But if you are like, if your supervisor is super busy, and like he would really want to see the paper in a very near complete version, so that he can have the whole
Mm.
idea, that how this has progressed along the discourse. And it's really better to have, like, my experience is that it's really like when your supervisor is super busy and a near complete version
So
from your end.
what do you think is probably if you're trying to take help from your friends in your lab or
Yes,
other kind
yes,
of
definitely.
colleagues, then probably it might work better because they have their own research, they are busy in their own research, and they will be taking some time out to give you some comments. So I think that this part by part thing would
Yes,
work better in that case.
definitely, because I can recall. So there was one a linguist in our lab, and she helped me a
Mhm.
lot in my initial days to correct my like English and grammatical errors. And she like I used to send her like 1 or 2 pages that, okay, madam, please try to see that whether this is actually being logical or not, and how you can frame up your argumentative discourse. So I would say it really helps to have another eye. And whenever you are like trying to say your friends that, okay, read the entire paper, so it might be a daunting task for them.
Right,
But if
that's
you
the
say, okay,
thing.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, if you say, okay, please see that if I have framed the data collection strategy well or
right,
not, if you know that that particular guy has already done some data collection or made some
right,
data for his or her
right,
experiment. So yeah, yeah.
right.
At
And
that point, it definitely helps.
right, and one point I want to mention is that before we wrap up for tonight is
Mhm.
that when you're doing literature survey, you guys, not just read the paper because you want to identify the research gaps and think where you can put your own contribution and so on and so forth, but also look into when you're reading very good papers and published in very good venues, uh, like journals or conferences. Make sure that you also look into the style, which Tirthankar was, Tirthankar, you were pointing out that every single community has their own style. So notice the style, notice how the paper has been written. So for every community, people try to, like you were talking about meta science versus IR, and how the way of writing something, has certain nuances which are sort of different to both the communities. So the more when you're reading a good paper, not just read the paper's content and try to understand where the research opportunity is, but also look into the style of writing, how the paper has been written, how the
Mhm.
paper has been structured, and and that is something that also needs, is a very learning experience, when you're reading very good
Yeah,
paper, very
yeah.
well written paper, right?
I I absolutely agree. So this is not easy. This is not at all easy. I must reiterate, and it takes time to like get into that flow of creating a really logical argumentative structure. So
Right.
no harm in spending time with reading lots of paper. And yeah, so once you have read a lots of paper, then only we can build our own logical narrative. So
Yeah.
literature service is super important. Yeah.
So I think I have a whole series of how to write a paper on YouTube. If you think that that might be helpful, guys, then you can just go through my YouTube link, and you can in your own time, whatever, whenever you get some time, you can watch some of those videos, and hopefully that will help you in
Mhm.
figuring out how to write a paper. Where I also talked a lot about the style and the structure and so on and so forth. Right. So yeah. So any questions? Any questions that anybody wants to ask? I see there are some, maybe another one or two questions. Uh, how to identify a number of research gaps in maybe own research work, or what are the appropriate parameters or types of methodologies from which I can be able to locate these gaps. Vidya, if you're talking about how to find research gaps of your own work, or are you? Is the question like how to find research gap in other people's work when you are doing literature survey? Because if you want to find research gaps in your own work, it's kind of it's almost like I think you know it by default that this is going to be the next sequel. So it's almost like, okay, this is my scope, this is the scope of this paper, and the next paper is going to be, I will be extending this work because I know there are some research gaps, and I will be trying to address those with some of those research gaps in my next paper, right? And that's how a paper is sequenced. Uh, if you're if you're more looking into like how to find research gaps while reading other people's work, again, I have some ideas which I have shared in some of my YouTube videos on how to on getting new ideas from research papers while you are reading research papers, how to get new ideas while you are
Mhm.
reading research papers. So you can go to those YouTube video links and watch some of them. I guess it might be very helpful. And if you still have specific questions, join Discord. In Discord, you can always ping me or ping anybody, for that matter. Because it's not that every question is with me, every answer rather it is me. There will be other people who have much better answer than me, and they can actually help you out over there. So do join Discord, everyone over here. I am sort of putting the link again on the chat. And any other question? Anybody? Let me see. How to choose the right journal to avoid troubleshooting? Uh, See, the right journal, again, one thing is that definitely you should definitely be asking your advisor or your supervisor or other people, other senior people in your community who have been working on in your area, in your research area, broadly in your area for a long period of time. So that's one. Definitely, there's no replacement of that. But at the same time, you can also go to places like, I'm one of my favorite places is this school JR. So I'll put the link over there, and you can look into the top journals. You can go and filter in terms of the area, then the sub area, and then you can check out the last 3 years, and you can get a whole ranked list of all the journals in that particular area, and then you can take the first quartile, that's the quartile one, and then you can look into what Tirthankar was saying. Go and look into the publications of each one of those journals, the last 2 years publication, and check out which one actually aligns with what you are doing the best. And then you can target those journals or conference. Same thing for conferences. And then you can target, make a short list of one of the best ways. Very very quickly you can figure out what are the top
And this uh, top story. So, this this point from Mali, uh, what is the top all and also different publishers have their own which is more considered for this topic to be updated as a video. Definitely difficult to ask you uh, the more point of proposal uh, you basically see the video for Mm, so, mm, we just discussed about this this, technology of the uh, able to work students. So yeah, so maybe like uh, hopefully